Imagine you're sitting in your living room. Maybe you're watching football, maybe you're helping your child with homework, maybe you're just scrolling through your phone, and then the ground beneath your feet starts moving. At first, you probably think it's your imagination. You may think that maybe you imagined a heavy truck just drove past, or maybe you are just feeling dizzy. But then your walls begin to shake, the lights start swinging, windows begin rattling, people rush outside, cars suddenly stop in the middle of the road, dogs start barking, and within seconds, panic takes over. Now here's the scary part. Just when people thought the shaking was over, it happened again. An even stronger earthquake happened again less than a minute later. Imagine surviving one powerful earthquake only to realize another one is already on its way. That's exactly what happened in Venezuela this week. And that's why this disaster shocked not just Venezuela, but scientists around the world. This wasn't just one earthquake. It was two massive earthquakes striking just 39 seconds apart. A phenomenon so rare that many seismologists spend their entire careers without studying one this powerful. By the time the shaking stopped, buildings had collapsed and entire neighborhoods were buried under concrete. Thousands of families suddenly found themselves sleeping outside, afraid that the ground might move again. And as rescue workers searched through the rubble, one question kept coming up. How could something like this happen, and why Venezuela? And has this country always been living on borrowed time without most people realizing it? Once you understand the story behind this earthquake, you realize this disaster didn't really begin on June 24th. In a way, it started millions of years ago. If you want more videos that explain the stories behind the world's biggest events, don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments which historical event we should uncover next. June 24th, 2026. To most people, it looked like a completely normal day. People were heading to work, children were in school, shop owners were opening their stores, traffic was moving like every other morning. Nobody woke up thinking that the day will change their lives forever. That's just the thing about earthquakes. Unlike hurricanes, earthquakes don't give you days to prepare. Unlike floods, they don't slowly rise. And unlike volcanoes, there's usually no dramatic warning that everyone can see. 1 second, life is normal, and the next, everything changes. At around midday, the ground beneath northeastern Venezuela suddenly began to shake. At first, many people didn't even realize what was happening. Some thought it was just a passing vibration and that it would stop after a few seconds, but it didn't. The shaking became stronger, ceilings cracked, glass shattered, electric poles swayed from side to side. People ran into the streets not knowing where was actually safe. You know that when the ground itself is moving, there really isn't anywhere that feels safe. Then something happened that made this disaster even more terrifying. Just 39 seconds after the first major earthquake, a second and even stronger one struck. Imagine trying to process the first earthquake only to be hit by another one before you even caught your breath. For many families, those 39 seconds probably felt like an eternity. Scientists later confirmed that Venezuela had been struck by what is known as a seismic doublet. In simple terms, a seismic doublet means two very powerful earthquakes occurring almost back to back. It's incredibly rare, and when it happens, the destruction is often much worse because buildings that survive the first quake may not survive the second. As the shaking finally stopped, a strange silence followed. No one knew exactly what had happened. Phone lines became overloaded. People desperately tried calling family members. Parents rushed towards schools. Hospitals immediately began preparing for casualties. Emergency services were deployed across the affected areas. Then the first images started appearing online. Images of collapsed buildings, cracked highways, rescue workers digging through piles of concrete, and families standing outside what used to be their homes. Within hours, the world realized that this wasn't just another earthquake. It was one of the most powerful natural disasters to hit Venezuela in recent years. If you looked at a map, you might actually ask yourself, why Venezuela? When people think about earthquakes, they usually think of Japan or Chile or Indonesia, not Venezuela. So why did this happen here? Was it completely unexpected? Or has Venezuela been sitting on one of the most dangerous geological zones in South America all along without most people realizing it? See, to answer that, we need to go back much further than June 2026. In fact, we need to go back millions of years. To understand why this happened, we need to look beneath Venezuela, not at its cities or at its mountains, but deep underground, beneath the surface. Our planet is constantly moving, even though it doesn't feel like it. Let me show you a relatable scenario. Imagine taking a boiled egg and gently cracking the shell. The shell doesn't come off in one piece, it breaks into several large fragments. Now imagine those fragments slowly moving against each other. That's actually a good way to picture the Earth's outer surface. The Earth's outer surface is broken into enormous pieces called tectonic plates, and they are moving all the time, very slowly, about the same speed your fingernails grow. It doesn't sound like much, but over millions of years, that tiny movement changes continents, creates mountains, and sometimes causes devastating earthquakes. Now here's where Venezuela enters the story. Northern Venezuela sits very close to the boundary between two massive tectonic plates, which are the Caribbean plate and the South American plate. These two plates have been pushing, scraping and grinding against each other for millions of years. Every single day, even while you are watching this video, they are still moving. The problem is the rocks along these plates boundaries don't slide smoothly. Instead, they get stuck. Imagine trying to push a heavy wardrobe across the floor. At first, it refuses to move. You keep pushing and nothing happens. More pressure builds, then suddenly it jerks forward all at once. That's exactly what happens on the ground. The pressure keeps building, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. Then in just a few seconds, all that stored energy is released, and we feel it as what? As an earthquake. Scientists have known for decades that northern Venezuela is part of an active seismic zone. In fact, there are several major fault systems running across the region. These faults act like giant cracks in the Earth's crust. Most of the time, they are quiet, but quiet doesn't mean inactive. It simply means pressure is still building. And this wasn't the first warning. Long before this week's disaster, Venezuela had experienced damaging earthquakes. One of the most devastating happened in 1967. On July 29th, a powerful earthquake struck near Caracas. Buildings collapsed, hundreds of people lost their lives, and thousands more were injured. For many Venezuelans, it was a reminder that the country wasn't immune to major earthquakes. Then again in 1997, another significant earthquake struck near Cariaco in Sucre State. Entire communities were affected. Roads cracked, homes collapsed, lives were changed overnight, and each event reminded scientists that the danger had never disappeared. So when the earthquake struck this week, it didn't happen because Venezuela suddenly became unstable. The forces responsible had been building for an incredibly long time, possibly for years, before finally reaching their breaking point. But if these tectonic plates have always been moving, why did this earthquake become so destructive? Why wasn't it just another tremor that people barely noticed? And what made two massive earthquakes happen almost back to back instead of just one? Every single day, there are thousands of earthquakes happening around the world. In fact, most of them are so small that nobody even feels them. So what made this one different? Well, the answer isn't just about how powerful the earthquake was, it's also about where it happened. Think of it like dropping a heavy object into water. If you drop it into the middle of the ocean, very few people notice. But drop that same object into a small swimming pool full of people and everyone feels the impact. Earthquakes work in a similar way. A powerful earthquake in a remote area may cause very little damage, but a powerful earthquake near towns, cities, and critical infrastructure can become a national disaster. Another important factor is depth. Not all earthquakes happen at the same depth beneath the Earth's surface. Some occur hundreds of kilometers underground, others happen much closer to the surface. Generally speaking, the shallower the earthquake, the stronger the shaking people experience above it. It's like hearing thunder. A storm that is far away sounds different from one that is directly above your house. Then there's something else, the ground itself. Believe it or not, the type of soil beneath a city can actually make an earthquake feel worse. Some places are built on solid bedrock, others are built on soft soil and loose sediments. Soft ground can actually amplify earthquake waves. Instead of reducing the shaking, it can make buildings sway even more. It's one of the reasons why two places experiencing the same earthquake can suffer completely different levels of damage. Now remember what happened in Venezuela. People weren't dealing with just one earthquake, they were dealing with two. It's just like trying to stand up after someone pushes you only to be pushed again before you've regained your balance. That's exactly what happened to many buildings. The first earthquake weakened structures. Then before those buildings had any chance to settle, the second and even stronger earthquake arrived. For structures that were already struggling, the second shock was sometimes all it took. And that's why scientists describe the event as so unusual. Two powerful earthquakes occurring just seconds apart is incredibly rare. Do you get it? Instead of one massive release of energy, the Earth released enormous amounts of energy twice, almost back to back. For emergency responders, that makes everything harder. People who thought it was safe to begin rescue efforts suddenly found themselves facing another violent round of shaking. Then we have the aftershocks. Aftershocks are not new earthquakes starting from scratch, no. They are the Earth's way of adjusting after the main event. The Earth's crust continues settling, sometimes for days, for weeks, and in some cases even months. That's why authorities often warn people not to rush back into damaged buildings immediately, because a building that survives the main earthquake might not survive a strong aftershock. And unfortunately, history has shown that aftershocks have caused additional injuries and collapses in many major earthquakes around the world. As rescue teams continued searching through damaged communities, another question started appearing. Could this have been predicted? If scientists knew Venezuela sits in an earthquake zone, why couldn't they warn people before the ground started shaking? We live in a world where your phone can tell you tomorrow's weather. It can predict a hurricane days before it arrives. Sometimes it even tells you when it's going to rain within the next hour. So why can't we do the same thing with earthquakes? Why can't someone simply say, on Friday at 2:30 p.m, a magnitude 7 earthquake is going to hit this city? Well, I learned that earthquakes don't work like the weather. You see, scientists know where earthquakes are likely to happen. They know which regions are dangerous, they know which fault lines are active, but they still don't know exactly when all that pressure underground will be finally released. For years, geologists have known that northern Venezuela is an active seismic region. They've mapped the fault lines, they've measured how the tectonic plates move, but knowing stress exists is very different from knowing the exact moment it will be released. That's the part nature still keeps secret. Now, there have been many claims over the years. Some people say animals can predict earthquakes, others claim strange lights appear in the sky before the ground shakes. Some even believe unusual weather patterns are warning signs. But the truth is that none of these methods have been proven to consistently predict earthquakes. Sometimes they happen, sometimes they don't. Scientists need evidence that works every single time, and so far, nobody has discovered that. What scientists have become very good at is detecting earthquakes almost instantly. The moment the Earth's crust breaks, powerful instruments called seismometers detect the waves racing through the ground. In some countries, that information can trigger earthquake early warning systems. These systems don't actually predict earthquakes. The earthquake has already started. But because earthquake waves travel at different speeds, people further away from the epicenter may receive a warning a few seconds before the strongest shaking reaches them. A few seconds doesn't sound like much, but it can be enough time to stop a train, shut down a gas line, pause surgery, or simply give someone enough time to protect themselves. Unfortunately, not every country has the same level of monitoring or infrastructure. And even where warning systems exist, they can't help people who are very close to the epicenter. For them, the shaking arrives almost immediately. So, could Venezuela's earthquake have been prevented? No. Could it have been predicted to the exact day and hour? Also no. But could its impact have been reduced? Absolutely. That's where things like stronger building regulations, earthquake-resistant construction, public awareness like the one I'm doing now, and emergency planning become incredibly important. Because while humans can't stop the Earth from moving, we can decide how prepared we are when it does. And that's exactly what rescue teams were forced to deal with after the shaking stopped. Entire communities had changed in less than a minute. Families were searching for loved ones. Hospitals were overwhelmed. And the world watched as Venezuela faced one of the biggest rescue operations in its recent history. But in the middle of all that destruction, the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things was unfolding. For thousands of people, the real nightmare was only beginning. The thing is, earthquakes don't just destroy buildings, they destroy routines, memories, and in some cases, they destroy entire lives. Imagine leaving your house in the morning thinking you'll be back in a few hours, only to return and find that your home no longer exists. Everything you've spent years building is gone in less than a minute. Family photos, important documents, your child's favorite toys, furniture, clothes, everything is buried beneath concrete and dust. That's the reality many families suddenly faced. As news spread across Venezuela, emergency services were immediately mobilized. This includes firefighters, medical teams, police officers, and civil defense volunteers. And eventually, international rescue teams also began offering assistance. Their mission was to find survivors. This is a whole lot. Standing in front of a collapsed apartment building and you know people are trapped inside. You can hear faint voices, maybe even someone knocking beneath the rubble. Every piece of concrete you move could cause another collapse. Every decision becomes a race against time. After a major earthquake, the first 24 to 72 hours are often the most critical. That's when rescue teams have the greatest chance of finding people alive. Then there were the hospitals. Doctors and nurses suddenly found themselves treating far more patients than usual. There are issues of broken bones, head injuries, deep cuts, and crush injuries. People who had escaped collapsing buildings only to arrive at hospitals already filled beyond capacity. And despite the pressure, medical workers continued treating patients around the clock. Meanwhile, outside the hospitals, another challenge was growing: fear. After the main earthquake had ended, people refused to go back inside, not because they had nowhere to sleep, but because they were terrified the ground would move again. And honestly, who could blame them? After experiencing two powerful earthquakes only seconds apart, every small vibration felt like another disaster waiting to happen. Some families spent the night in open fields, others stayed inside their cars. Many gathered in parks simply because being outdoors felt safer than being inside damaged buildings. Communication became another problem. Phone networks became overwhelmed. Thousands of people tried calling loved ones at exactly the same time. Some couldn't get through and others had no idea whether their family members were safe. For hours, many people were left waiting, hoping, praying, and refreshing their phones again and again. Sometimes silence can be just as frightening as the earthquake itself. But disasters also have a strange way of bringing out the best in people. Neighbors who had never spoken before were suddenly helping each other clear debris. Restaurants began giving away food. Volunteers distributed water, blankets, and medical supplies. People opened their homes to complete strangers who had nowhere else to go. When everything around you is falling apart, human kindness becomes just as important as heavy machinery. Rebuilding after a disaster like this doesn't take days, it takes years. And perhaps the biggest lesson from Venezuela's earthquake wasn't just about the power of nature. It was a reminder that no matter how advanced humanity becomes, there are still moments when the earth reminds us who's really in control.